It's gonna be a fine day today, I can see. It's gonna be a fine day today, I can see. It's gonna be a fine day today for you and me.
What is up, everybody? This is Chase, and welcome back to the Wellness Center podcast. I am so grateful that you guys are here with me, destigmatizing mental health one episode at a time. Guys, my guest, I'm super pumped for him today. This guy is an absolute rock star. From someone who has been in the work field from the time he was in his early years, about 12 years old, all the way up into becoming one of the top business owners in the state of Utah, running one of the best consulting firms that I am personally aware of. I'm super excited for this guy because he is going to share some raw, vulnerable, and honest conversations with us that I think are going to be truly awesome. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest, Spencer Lowe. Spencer, how you doing today, bro?
Amazing. Thanks for having me, Chase.
Good, dude. I'm so grateful you're here today. And also, everyone, as you're listening to this episode today, I invite you to share it with someone that you know is going to benefit from these episodes. So Spencer, dude, other local Utah, or not local Utah native, is someone else in Utah today. How are you enjoying the weather?
Oh, it's great. It's finally warming up a little bit. Still got a bunch of snow on the mountains, reminding me of the skiing that was. But it's got a nice cool breeze, sun's out, so I appreciate that.
You know what? I believe that Utah has this really firm, it goes winter, spring, second winter, second spring, and we're just into that second spring.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you get this little dose. We had that dose a little while ago. It was like 2 weeks of like, oh man, is it spring? I'm going out in t-shirts, and then boom, it's snowing again. And then, now I don't know about second spring. I think it almost usually just goes straight to summer. It feels like sometimes, but we are getting kind of a second spring right now. So
yeah, it's nice, man. It's time to get planning your gardens if you do that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
Dude, Spencer, so if you could just give us some cookie cutter answers as to who you are and what you do, just so I can get to know you a little bit better, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. So, I grew up in California for the most part, moved out to Utah when I was in college, went to BYU, got a master's degree in information systems management, and was doing consulting during my program in the Salesforce space, so helping companies that use Salesforce.com. And then about a year and a half after I graduated, I saw the opportunity to go start my own company. So I started a company called Solved.Cloud. And that company is a Salesforce consulting firm. We help businesses with their technology, specifically Salesforce.com and then related generative AI technologies are the two areas we focus on. We predominantly help like SaaS businesses, high tech type businesses, as well as financial services firms. So advisory firms and, investors, private equity, VC, banks, things like that. So those are kind of the areas we play in on the technology consulting side. And then on the side, I created a podcast called Lessons in Leverage. And that served a few different purposes, but really the idea behind it is just to give back and help people learn what I would consider the highest leverage skills that allow people to get more out of life. And for me, I look at my life and I think beyond a certain level of sort of education, work ethic, and intelligence, the outcomes are very different, and yet the inputs are not so different. When you look at people in very different circumstances, and yet they're putting similar inputs in, but they're getting these different outputs. And to me, when I say leverage, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not using it in the narrow form or in just the financial sense or, in the negative connotation that sometimes it gets. I'm using it really just as like, where are the areas of life where I can take the inputs that I'm putting in and get way bigger outputs? Because as I look through my life, there's maybe 7 or 8 key lessons that as I learned those and learned how to wield leverage in those areas, really amplified my success. And so, that's kind of what brings us here today. We've gotten to the point where now the consulting firm's doing great. We have about 63 consultants. And that's grown really well and is running really well. And then we've got the podcast that we're building to really try to help people. And so seemed like a great fit when I saw, the Wellness podcast and we were able to connect. Because I think we have a really strong overlap in terms of mission of wanting to help people, and mental health is certainly a part of that.
Dude, I think it's so cool. So like my podcast is all about like bringing awareness to mental health and making sure you're okay with it. So once you listen to my podcast, the goal is to go listen to Spencer's podcast, because he's going to take all of the basic entry skills that I teach you and teach you how to leverage them. So I know I need to listen to Spencer today. So this is going to be super awesome. So with Cloud or Solved.Cloud, was it like, as working in the workforce business, did you just kind of see a hole in the market there, or what was kind of your thoughts to creating your business?
Yeah, I mean, I really look at entrepreneurship. There's a few kind of broad categories of entrepreneur. People have often defined it as sort of visionary entrepreneur versus opportunistic entrepreneur is a common way of phrasing it. Between those two, I certainly would put myself in the opportunistic category, where a big strength throughout my career has been identifying opportunities. And look, if a market is growing fast enough and you just get into it, you're in a good place. It's like if you bought Bitcoin when it was really, really low, the number one predictor of any investment outcome is the price you buy it at. So that sounds really simple, but it applies to entrepreneurship as well. Not all businesses have the same rate of failure, have the same chance of success. If you choose the right market and you have the right skills, you have a much higher chance of success. And so for me, I already had the skill set, the technical skill set that I built up during college as a consultant. And I previously, as we can get into, as a child, that developed a sales skill set and some other skills that gave me confidence that I could build a business. And so using those together, I said, all right, this market is growing on average. Like if you're just an average services provider in this space, you're growing at like 20+% a year at the time. Now it's lower than that. I think it's down to 13 or 14, but it was up in the mid 20s when I first started. And so what that means is if I can come in and just be as good as the average firm, my business is going to grow 25% a year. And so this is something I think a lot of people miss or don't think about, which is like, I'd much rather be on a huge wave, but be a crappy surfer. Because if that 30-foot wave, if I fall, it at least throws me hundreds of feet forward. But if I'm an amazing surfer on a 1-foot wave, I just don't have any energy to carry me, and I'm not getting very far. And so I'm not a surfer, so that may or may not be the best analogy, but the concept's the same, which is I'd rather be an opportunistic entrepreneur that finds the opportunity where the market is already setting me up for success, and then I'm just doing my best to amplify that. Now, luckily for us, we grew into the triple figures, hundreds of percent a year for the first 3.5 years, and then still are growing really aggressively and way outperforming that average. And that's the benefit of being better than average. If you're better than average in a really high growth market, well, now you really can capture market share and get bigger and bigger. So that's exciting. But yeah, that's why I did it. Was I had built up enough skills, and I really just got to the point where I was more scared of what I'd miss out on if I didn't try than I was of what it seemed like I could lose by trying.
Dude, that sound cool. It's funny as you're talking, I'm only thinking I'm like, he's applying leverage. He's applying leverage. He's finding those places where he can leverage his skills. And then, yeah, you see that triple digit growth, which is phenomenal. Congratulations to you, Spencer. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Right. So yeah, let's actually go into these questions, man. So you're talking about leverage, and I see that you've actually been finding leverage and applying yourself in all different areas of life for a long time. So take us back to a young Spencer Lowe. When were some of the first times you were struggling with your mental health?
I don't. Well, actually, yeah. I think there were some struggles in my mental health as a kid. In fact, and I didn't think about that until you just asked the question. But specifically as a kid, I really was convinced that I had no friends, and I think it's actually pretty objectively true that I really didn't have friends in high school.
Okay.
Like until I was about 17, I had people that I interacted with for short periods of time that were constantly changing, and I just didn't feel like anybody really prioritized me in the relationship. And I had there's a bunch of good reasons for that. I was really needy, and I was really immature, and was trying to get attention. And we can go back and dissect it, but I didn't feel that sense of connection as a kid. And so I remember specifically one time I went out, my mom told my dad, she's like, he's really struggling. You need to take him out and like just talk to him. And so my dad took me out to KFC, and I remember sitting in KFC just bawling, just crying. And I was like, Dad, none of these guys want to be my friend. None of them care. None of them really want to invest in a relationship. I keep trying to like find a best friend. I was obsessed with this idea of I need to have a best friend. And then I'd find someone be like, they're my best friend. And then they would have a different best friend. I'd be like, oh my God. And I was just so needy. I was really, really insecure. And so with that being said, I was like bawling to my dad. And my dad was like, look, I felt that way as a kid too. And for what it's worth, I don't know anybody from high school anymore. None of them are part of my life. Like all of this, or from elementary school or middle school. I think that when we did this, I think I was in middle school. It was either maybe 8th grade, maybe 9th grade, maybe it was the beginning of high school. But I just was like, just felt miserable. And he spoke some wisdom to me. It was helpful, but I still was struggling with that. And so that was probably the first, as I go back on the fly here, and I think when as a kid I struggled with mental health, I think that was the main struggle I had as a kid, was just wanting to feel accepted and not feeling very valued or accepted. Ironically, somewhat interrelated to that, I created a real drive to prove that I was good enough. And so I was starting a business, and I was, there were some other financial factors in my family that drove that as well. But, from the time I was 12, I started a lawn mowing business, and then that turned into door-to-door sales. And I did 8 years of door-to-door sales. And then I went out and did more sales. And so with that being said, I was trying so hard to have money. And I clearly remember when I was 14, um, I had this realization that, oh, if I have money, people will like me. That's a dangerous association to make. It turned out to be a really good, bad belief to adopt, because then I went on to make a lot of money, because it felt like the way I could meet my need for love and connection. But it was, what it led to was, like, I ignored school. I just went out and sold, and I'd make really good money every night. And then I would be able to take my friends out to restaurants they couldn't afford. And there's just all sorts of ways that I started viewing this as, like, wasted a ton of money, but I was just trying to buy love, essentially. And it kind of works as a teenager. There were girls that would ignore me, and then all of a sudden, I had the tickets to the concert they wanted to go to, and then they wouldn't. And so there was all these little sort of bad things that sort of reiterated this idea that, oh, the more money I have, the more attention I'm getting that I want. And so, yeah, I just had all these sort of screwed up feelings about being accepted early on, that mostly started to iron out when I was 17, and really found a friend group that was solid, and some best friends that I still have to this day. And things really started to get good, and I matured, and I grew up a little bit. But that's kind of the extent of when I look back at my childhood and the elements of the mental health. I think it's really was just around wanting to be accepted. And then the drive and some of the associations of, well, if I'm successful enough, people will want to be around me.
Yeah, dude, thank you for being willing to share all that. Like, as you're talking, so many synchronicities, right? I was the needy, needed to have a friend, needed to have a girlfriend, couldn't hold anything down. So I totally get where you're coming from, man. That need to, like, have friends, to be loved by people. Where do you think that stemmed from? Looking back with
Um,
2020 hindsight.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work, and so I think I have some pretty clear answers. That's why I have that clarity around sort of that money association and what that became.
Yeah,
But we can talk later about some of the tools that help me get to that. But
100%.
I would say that for me, I think most people, it's actually kind of simple. I'm a huge fan of Tony Robbins. Been to a ton of his conferences, and he's been a big tool in my life. And one of the patterns you'll see him do with people is he'll ask the question, which parent did you really want love from? And then he'll follow that up with, who did you need to be to get love from that parent? And though that series of two questions broke my mind when I was thinking about it for myself. I was like, oh my gosh, am I that basic? Are we all that basic? Is it that simple? And it's not the answer to everything, but it's shocking how common I've seen this, even with my employees when I coach them, and for myself, where I go back and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's as simple as, I really wanted my dad's love and affection. And in order to get it, my mindset was, I needed to show I was successful.
I had to
And
work hard.
I had to go show that I was, worth it, that I could produce results. And what's hilarious is I'm so grateful for that now, because it's created so many of the good blessings in my life. But I've also had to outgrow it, because it was causing some problems for me. But when I think about that need to be accepted, I just wanted to feel accepted by my dad. And to no fault of his own, he was a great man. He is a great man. I say I say was, because he's got dementia. So there's some, I've
Mm,
processed a bit that he's kind of gone, at
yeah.
least in the state that I once saw him. But the truth is, he's still alive, and so hopefully he doesn't hear this and be mad at me for saying it. Um, but I've sort of had to process the fact that he's, it's not the same anymore, and he's at a different place. So with that being said, that's really what it comes down to, is I wanted my dad's love, attention, affection, and I think I just started trying to fill that with friends, and having a best friend that I could find that with.
Yeah, and I can so, like, the stories you told yourself too, like, as you would get the friend, and then the friend would have another best friend, or you'd pursue the girl, you maybe date her for a month or two, and then she moves on. What were some of the stories that you told yourself in those moments?
Um, I think at the time I just was really confused. I didn't understand why anyone wouldn't want the same thing I wanted, which is just to spend every waking moment together and go do everything together. Like, all I needed. I've always been a sort of quality over quantity kind of guy, in terms of, like, relationships. Like I just wanted one or two people that like we were ride or die. Let's go enjoy everything together. Like we don't need anybody else. And a lot of kids that were honestly more well balanced didn't feel that way. They're like, oh, I can be best friends with this person. I can spend time with it. In fact, that was just something I didn't really pick up on, was just this social awareness that a lot of kids had more naturally. And it just took me a long time to realize some of the things I was doing that were kind of turning off friendships or making people feel less inclined to spend time with me. And so, yeah, I wasn't very self-aware, but I think my story was probably mostly like, well, I'll show you. Like, it was very much like a defiant, like, I'm not going to take any responsibility for this, but I will prove that that was a dumb decision. I remember I got into a fist fight with one of the guys that I thought was my best friend. And then in summer school, he started mocking me openly in front of the whole class. And I was just like, and we had been friends for a long time. And it was just basically kind of turning on a dime over the course of a few weeks. And then all of a sudden he's kind of challenged me in front of the class. And yeah, that ended up just with us in an altercation, um, which I just didn't have any awareness. And so my story was basically like, oh, I guess I've got to prove something. I've got to go show that like you made a bad choice. You're wrong. I don't know. I viewed life, I think, significantly back then through sort of just a right and wrong lens. Like you're wrong on this. I'm right. I don't know. Nothing healthy. Didn't have any good stories. Didn't have anything that was really helping me.
Dude, in my own way, I resonate you. I remember one time my brother sat down with me because I got an older brother, and he says, dude, the fact that I need to keep like affirming that you're a good person is exhausting. Please stop. Like, so I can totally see where you're coming from there, man. And I get that. I see a lot of synchronicities. Thank you so much, man. So you talk about you get to this point where you're 17 and things just start to click for you and you change. What kind of happened going forward after that?
Yeah, I think there was a couple things that shifted there. One was I met two really good friends. So when I started to mature a little bit. So I started to be less needy. And I had been doing sales now for a few years, and I started to realize like sales is life. Like communication is communication. If you learn to connect with people, if I can get someone on the door to do something, I can get someone in my personal life to do something. Like, and so I started making these connections between like, oh, I have to sell people on me. And so just like on the door, if I'm super needy, they're not going to buy. I also can't be desperate in my relationships. So I started connecting dots from sales that were like, oh, this applies to all my relationships. So that was one of the things that was starting to come into play. Having money just made it easier to do things and be a part of things from sales. I met two really great people in my life that also were like willing to be really direct with me. And so I felt like, the feedback loop got better. And I started to develop more of my own hobbies and connect with them around those hobbies. And so, um, a lot of things were happening. I also was a really lanky kid. I was, in like my junior year, I was 6'5", but I weighed maybe 115 pounds. Like I was
Your skin and bones.
just this lanky, not attractive, not confident kid at all. Um, and then by the time I was getting into my senior year, I was actually starting to fill out a little bit, felt a little bit more comfortable in my skin. So it's just a lot of things, right? That come together that where you start to feel like, um, okay, like I can see where things are going. And I started to have more of a direction for my life. Um, so, in terms of where did it go from there? I mean, I went out on a mission for a church that I belonged to, which involved, basically talking to people all day for 2 years straight. You could say, depending on how you want to frame it, you could say it was selling Jesus, or you could say that it was, a master's degree in communication. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could put it, but fundamentally, the life experience was really, really eye opening for me, especially because it was in France and Switzerland and Europe, and just I was exposed to all these people that just saw the world totally different than me, and so that was really eye opening in so many ways. And so that also was a big part of my life, in my early 20s and getting that experience. And so I came back and the number one thing I took away from that, when you're on a mission like that, it's a very regimented schedule. At least it was back then. The way that it worked, I mean, you would essentially work for 16 hours a day and in different ways, in different capacities for more or less 7 days a week. You have one day where there's part of the day that you didn't have to work. But I took really seriously following the rules and like, I'm going to do this. Um, and so I was working really hard for amounts of time that as a 21-year-old, you just don't even you can't fathom. So when I came home from that, one of the big things that had shifted in me is I had this whole new level of what hard work was. I was like, I can have an 8-hour day job and feel like I have half my day free. Like my whole mind was opened up to just how hard I could potentially go work. And the reason that was so important is because work started to become part of my identity. I was going back into sales and then ended up going into consulting after that. And so I slowly started to find an identity in how I could contribute as an employee or as an entrepreneur. And again, in some ways, those were really healthy associations that led to great outcomes in my life. In some other ways, that created some problems for me. And that's where I would say that opened the door to some of the real problems that I suffered with. Like the times that I think of, all the stuff in my childhood, I look at that as like normal mental health, just like maturing. It was hard, but I just think everyone goes through a journey as a child and you're trying to figure it out. Some kids maybe have it easier than others, but I'm glad it was as hard as it was for me. It really made me resilient and helped me to get to where I am. But as an adult, I think really everything starts changing and a whole new set of kind of mental health problems come forward. And so as my career started, there were at least 4 big events that I can think of, and we can decide if we want to spend time on some of them or all of them, but there were at least 4 times that were just major eye-opening experiences.
Yeah, dude. And I would love to talk about that. So I got one more question about the story beforehand. You feel like when you
Yep.
got home from your mission that need to buy people, buy friendships, was that still prevalent in your life at that point, or had you worked through that?
That stayed prevalent until probably last year, but it was very hidden. I didn't see it that way. See, it's all clear to me now,
Right.
but at the time I would have never explained it that way. Now,
Right.
as a teenager, I did explicitly state like, oh, it's nice to have money because like I can get dates with girls that I used to not be able to get dates with. And like say what you will, like I went to a restaurant and there was a girl who was way more attractive than most of the girls I could normally date who always ignored me. And I went and she was working as a server and I left her a tip that was 100% of the bill and it was like $120 and I'd paid for the whole table. And I left her a tip and put my phone number on and she texted me immediately. And then I took her to a concert and like doors open to me that did not exist before. I'm not saying all women are motivated by money, but all I'm saying is as a teenager, I was
Feels
learning
good.
I got attention from it. And to me, it was that black and white. It was, I don't think I'm that attractive. So I got to rely on the 2 other things that seem to work with girls, which is money and humor. It's like, to me as a teenager, my perception of the world was girls like 3 things: attractive guys, funny guys, and guys with money. And that's how I broke it down in my head. And I was like, I can't control the attractive one that much. So I'm going to work on the other 2. So I tried to be as funny as I could and I tried to have enough money. So that was, so yes, at that time I saw it as sort of like relationships were a little bit transactional that way, but I didn't really think that like anything durable I didn't think I could really buy love. I just thought this is a door this could open doors to me for relationships. And then when I got back from my mission, you spend 2 years serving other people. I came back with a whole different level of just idea of purpose and wanting to do good in the world, wanting to be, helpful and make an impact. And so I had a very different mentality coming back, but my behaviors were immediately, how do I make money and how do I use that to kind of build the life I want, which involved trying to, get relationships. And so in hindsight, yes, that was still there. At the time, I probably didn't think that's what it was.
And that makes total sense, bro. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I know you talked about some of the 4 main things that happened in your life. I'd love to talk about those. So just to bring in the question formally, right? Let's talk about your hero's journey. So for those listening, if you don't know what the hero's journey is, it's essentially some hard trials or extreme pivotal moments in someone's life that forces them to make a change in how they're doing things to ultimately become better, a refiner's fire, essentially. So Spencer, yeah, dude, let's start talking about some of these 4 refiner's fires you went through.
Yeah, I would break it down into kind of 4 pivotal moments. So, I had a 1.9 in high school. I didn't care about school. So when I decided I was going to go to college, which was basically on a whim, a friend of mine said, "We're having a bunch of fun out here. Come out here." And so I quit my job and drove out with literally no plan or arrangements and showed up with a car full of stuff and was like, "Great, I'm going to find a house. I'm going to find a job. Like, I'm just going to figure it out." So I showed up. I was like, worst case scenario, I can sleep on one of my friend's couches, whatever. Like, I'll figure something out. And so I came out to Utah. And then I was like, I guess I got to go to college because everyone's going to college. So I started taking courses as a non-admitted student, and then I really took that seriously since I hadn't taken high school seriously, got straight A's, and then applied as a transfer student, and then got into BYU. And so then I'm in BYU, and I have, not a ton of money, but I've always believed from a child, and this comes back to some of the financial education my dad gave me. But I was like, debt's not an option. I'm not using debt. I'm gonna go through college. I'm gonna pay for it. So that meant I was working full time at the same time I was going to school full time, and so I had zero free time. I
Yeah.
was
Especially going to
7 days.
BYU too.
Yeah, it was 7 days a week, just busy from 6 in the morning till 11, 12 at night. Like, it was just, I'm busy always. So I didn't have much of a personal life, but eventually made room for the woman that became my wife, who is wonderful, and we got married. Um, and so I sort of had this life where it was super hectic. And so we waited to have kids a few years because, like, we barely even saw each other for a couple years. And then I graduated and I was like, okay, here we go. Like, now I can just be a full-time consultant, and, stress levels down. And I wouldn't even say it was stress. It was more busyness during the school and work kind of combo that I was doing. But I thought, all right, I got all this time now. And so I really thought, all right, well, I need to put that time into my career. I need to be able to accelerate my career now that I have all this additional time. And I also need to spend more time with my wife, but that's easy. I can do that. I can be at home, but I need to find ways to accelerate my career. And so I did that. And I really was looking for opportunities to continue to move up fast in my company. And so the first sort of sign of that, I quickly became one of the top consultants and was trusted with some of our best accounts. And so I got this account that, to really keep the story short, became a massive account, our largest account. And I really put a lot of my personal identity into the success of this account. And without getting into all the details, because it'll take forever, basically what happened was the deadlines and the pressure got bigger and bigger. The outstanding balance with them got bigger and bigger. So they had a bunch of leverage on us in terms of, we won't pay if we don't get certain results. So I had all my emotions and future tied up, and they owe us $400,000+. And I'm just like, this is our most important client, and I'm leading it. And it's my job to make sure it's successful, and my identity is tied up in that. And we started having these deadlines where every week it was like, seemed harder and harder, and the client was pushing us super hard. And I was like, I will find a way. I will always find a way to get this done. And so there, for probably 3 or 4 weeks straight, I was working the entire weekend to make sure Monday morning when we had our stand-ups, I could tell them, yeah, we're done, we're ready. And I was successful each time. And so all the stress or pressure paid off with this like rush of like, I did it. And so I'm a success. And then one week we got to the weekend, nothing was even close. Like, we were not close to being able to go back and tell them we were successful. And I work through the weekend, and it's Sunday night, and it's my wife's birthday, and her family's all upstairs singing happy birthday. And I'm down in my office just working. And I'm like, oh, I'll go up and sing. And then I came back down and just kept working. So basically ignore my wife's birthday. And I'm doing everything I can this Sunday night to try to just make sure I can get it done. I'm like, man, I'm still so far away. My brain's getting foggy. It's like 11:30 at night. I'm like, okay, I'm going to bed. I go to bed. I get up. I'm like, I'm getting up early to make sure I can be ready. So I'll get up at 3 a.m. because I got to go work out and get ready. And then I'm going to go into the office. I'm going to be there early. So I'll be there like 4:35, and I can like get a bunch of work done before I have to go to the clients at 8. And so I'm like, all right, great. I do that. I work out, go into the office, start working. I'm like, I'm going to get this over the finish line. I'm going to make sure there's some big wins here to show the client. And it's just nothing. Like, we're not even, it's just, I couldn't even BS my way into saying we had succeeded at all with what they really cared about. And I just felt like a complete failure. And so 7:30 came around, which is when I needed to leave to be at the clients for, I think, 8:15. And I just stood up, drove home, sent an email, said, hey, I'm out sick today. And I just went home and just cried. I was just in the fetal position on my bed, just crying, and just felt like a total failure because the weight of everything was crushing down on me. I was like, not only did I fail on this, but I sacrificed my wife's birthday for this. I sacrificed my entire weekend. I've been sacrificing every weekend for 4 or 5 weeks now, and none of it matters. and I'll never be good enough, and all the other unhealthy narratives that come from just that level of depth of just feeling like a complete failure. And so that was the first really big experience, was crying. And my wife's holding me. She has no idea what's going on. She's like, "Why are you home from work? And why are you in tears? Like, did you get fired?" I'm like, "No." And I just, I couldn't even talk though. I just kept crying and I was in such a dark place. And so that was experience number one. Experience number two came a little bit later, which
Okay.
was the second big project. So that project, we ended up succeeding. The moral of that story, the big takeaway from that story, and then we'll come back and talk about some of these, but the big takeaway from that story was I talked to the other lead on the project. I was the consulting lead, and another person was the developer lead, and he had went to the meeting. So I asked him the next day, I was like, "Hey, they just hate us. Like, did everything fall apart?" And he's like, "No, they were like disappointed, but it was no big deal. We just moved on." And I was like, my mind almost exploded. Like, here I was putting all of my identity into this, and no one even cared, it seemed like. And he just showed up and was like, "Yeah, we didn't do it." And the client was like, "Okay, well, that's not good. How are we going to do it this week?" And I'm like, "What?" Like, here I am, like, failure is unacceptable and we will find a way. And I'm the only one and no one cares as much as me. And like, I just, it broke my brain. And so I was like, never again, never again. So I was like, I'm setting boundaries. So the big takeaway from that was boundaries. We could talk about some of the resources on that too. But then the second thing that happened was very shortly after that, I got put on a new project, and it was now the new biggest project the company had ever done. And it was all on me. And I just started traveling Monday through Friday. I was in California away from my wife. She had a newborn infant that she was watching, and I was away from her 5 days a week for a year straight.
That's hard on
And
your wife and you.
yeah, that was terrible. And glad that it was, because that ended up leading to me. That was part of the calculus that led to me quitting my job and starting my company. But the big takeaway from that one was, or just the summary of that story was that essentially one, started to make the same mistake of tying my identity to the outcomes of the project, and two, wasn't enforcing some of those boundaries. Um, and sort of three was really just that I started to tell myself, well, I'll be happy when, I got into the "I'll be happy when" thinking, is what I like to call it, which is just, any pain today is okay because there's some day in the future that I won't be in pain, which not a good pattern. So that was sort of the second big time. The third big time, I'm not even going to get into what happened. It'll take too long, but basically just I was having serious sleep issues. And so I was waking up super stressed out, waking up in the middle of the night with cold sweats, anxiety. I got into full blown panic attacks, which I had never understood till I had one. And I was like, this is insanity. Borderline hallucination because I couldn't sleep for a few days straight. Just like crazy things. So sleep issues. And the big takeaway from that was the important and relationship between physical health and mental health. And the fourth one was I got to a point where I had essentially achieved all my goals, and I just felt apathetic. I felt like, man, this was like my life goals and I'm done with them. And I'm like 33. Like, what am I even doing? And does any of this even matter? And like, do I just write it out from here? So those are kind of the four big elements. And so we can go back and dive into those, but those were the four times that, from the time I was about 25 to now I'm going on 35 here shortly, over about a 10-year period, there were four really big ones, each of which led to some really big learnings. But the last one, the fourth one, ended up being the most powerful because I had the money and access to actually go get some of the best help and resources, and it's changed my life.
Dude, that's amazing. Yeah, and thank you for sharing like all of the stuff in your journey, man. I can imagine that lesson on boundaries was so hard. And I had to learn that too. I remember I was a real estate agent for about 5 years. And by the time I quit my real estate, I had no boundaries. It was 6:30, 5:30 in the morning when I was going to the gym. I was responding to texts and emails, and I was doing paperwork at like 11 and midnight. And so I get that. I totally get that. And to be able to walk away from that and be like, all right, that wasn't healthy for me. I'm going to start putting some boundaries down and actually like adhering to those boundaries. That's hard work. That's
Mm,
really hard work. One of my favorite quotes is boundaries are only as good as the person who's willing to uphold them.
mm,
And being able to step into that place of integrity and uphold those boundaries it's challenging. It really is, especially as like people pleasers. It takes a lot of work because you think that if I hold this boundary, they're not going to like me. Right. So I totally resonate with that, bro. I would actually love just to start talking about the coping skills, the good stuff, right? So,
sure.
from these four major experiences that you went through, what were some of the coping skills that you developed, and how have they all evolved over time?
Yeah, there are several. I'll share just kind of quickly one or two things I picked up at each point, and then, but I want to spend most of the time talking about the things that have made the biggest impact for me, because I think I wish I'd have got to those sooner.
Love it.
So, a couple resources that had a really big impact on me in some of those early big breakdowns. One of them was a book called Essentialism. And that book really is what got me thinking about boundaries, the idea of what is enough. One of the sort of meta topics in that book is just getting you to think through and define what is enough in any area of my life, in my career, in my family. Like, sometimes people use the term boundary in a way that I think is actually counterproductive, where it's like, this is what I will not do. And this is, we kind of create limits on ourselves, when what we're really trying to get to is not so much saying like finding ways to not achieve. It's more finding a way to defend the things that will create the fulfillment we want. And so it's like, people will be like, well, I'm never working after 5. Well, that's okay if that works for you. But for me, I've found that actually I need the flexibility to work late into the night sometimes to feel fulfilled in my career. But I also need to have times where I'm not willing to do anything but be at my kid's soccer game, or be there for my wife, or enjoy all these moments in my family that are so important to me. And so for me, sometimes boundaries become a distraction, and it's more about really prioritizing the outcomes you want in these different areas of your life, and then defending those. There's a great quote that says, every yes must be defended by 1,000 no's. And I think sometimes people get boundaries backwards, where they start with, what am I saying no to, instead of starting with, what am I saying yes to? And now, what 1,000 no's have to defend that yes? And our brain just doesn't process the negative well. So it's like, don't work after 5, don't work after 5, don't work after 5. And then you just work after 5, or your brain's there, even though you're not physically there, because you keep reaffirming that, instead of being like, after 5, I'm looking forward to going with my kids to do this. I have a priority for 5 o'clock with my family. And so I get to go pursue that and enjoy it. And so it's a slight distinction, but it was a really important one for me. And something that I think essentialism helps with, or starts to set the tone for. And then there's later tools we can talk about that build on it. But essentialism was a book that really was a massive piece of getting over that first big burnout and saying, all right, what is enough in these areas of my life? So then the second book that really hit me hard, and it was during that second big dilemma I had, where I was traveling all the time. That book was called Lost Connections. And Lost Connections highlighted for me a couple of really important concepts and tactics that I applied. One was just this idea that we're social beings, and we sort of undervalued the need for social connection. And so really going in and doing some of the tactics in the book, it talks about all sorts of different things that can affect anxiety and depression. So it gives us huge lists. So it was everything from reducing the amount of advertising that I got exposed to. So like, one thing I advise people to do that is somewhat unconventional is pay for the no ads on every service you use. Like, be selective in what services you use, but there's no amount of savings in money that's worth being exposed to ads. Like, everywhere in my life that I cannot expose myself to ads is a meaningful increase in my happiness. And so anywhere that I can be exposed to ads, the whole purpose of an advertisement is they need to make you feel like you are emotionally not good enough in some area of your life, so that you will then feel motivated to use purchasing their product or service as a way to meet that need. And so once you really grasp that that's all advertising and marketing is it's purposely designed to associate their product and service with the emotional outcomes you want, and get you to disassociate yourself from that and feel like you're not good enough, then it just becomes an absolute edict of like, I'm not going to put myself in situations that I get exposed to ads unless I absolutely have to. Like, there's just such a strong correlation where decreasing that exposure makes me happier. So that's one tactic that maybe people don't think about a lot, but has made a meaningful impact in my life. And obviously there's the impact of social media. It talks about all these different things, but some of the less common ones would be doing what it takes to decrease my ad exposure. Gardening, they're huge on some of the nature aspects, and grounding, and going out and getting your hands in the soil and what that does for your mental health. Community contribution. There's a lot of things in that book that really started to help me feel different about my life. And then, early on, I also think I was looking for tactics that were very actionable. We often think, our first inclination is to think that the problem is a skill we don't have. And often skills are just a small portion of it. And the larger thing is changing our beliefs and our mindset and our psychology. But that is harder to unpack on our own initially. And so we just like, what skill do I not have? And so a book that did give me skills that helped me manage my life better during those early two issues was called Procrastinating on Purpose. And that really just talks about building leverage essentially, but it also talks about how you can say no to things, how you can get down to really the things that matter in terms of just your productivity. And so that was a really good one. And the last book that also during that period really had a huge impact was called The Courage to be Disliked. And that was meaningful, especially for me as someone who started to realize that most of these problems were driven from this desire to be liked. And so those books, those would be some resources I want to just get in people's minds if you're going through some of those early stages. And I think most people do. Most people 2 to 5 years into their career, they struggle with this is something that people don't tell you. They don't tell you that like most people are going to have a bit of a crisis 2 to 5 into their years into their career. And I've started to teach my employees this. It's like expect that you're going to wonder, am I in the right job? Am I in the right place? Am I doing the right things? How do I compare to my friends? Like there's just this natural pattern. And so if you know that's coming and you know that these are some books or some things that align to it, you can really prepare yourself to not get caught off guard the way I did. And so those were the early skills that really helped with kind of just the burnout and trying to establish habits of boundaries. What is enough? How do I decrease my exposure to things that are designed to make me unhappy, anxious, and depressed? And how do I increase my exposure to things that will counteract depression? And so that's sort of the toolbox that helped me early on.
Dude, I love that. And I love how so many people can learn those different skills in different ways. You know, for me, I had to do a 10-day food fast.
Hmm.
And in that 10-day food fast, I also fasted from all social media and news outlets. And
Hmm.
I haven't been back on social media or news outlets because of how much negativity and comparison that there are on those different outlets. And when you talk about physical health and gut health and mental health and how they all correlate, 100% agree with you, bro. So, dude, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing so many awesome applicable skills. How have they evolved now? You know, I know you talk
Yeah.
about the big skills, the big ones are changing the belief patterns. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So, about a year ago, that's when I thought to myself, all right, like that's when I got into that state of apathy. And so I didn't really know what I needed. It was this feeling of like, I've achieved all my goals. And so do I just sell my company and retire and never work again? That doesn't seem exciting. Do I like what am I even doing? And like, do I want to get caught in the rat race of always needing more and more and trying to have the biggest company and the nicest car and the biggest house? And like, that doesn't sound like what I want. And so I just really felt kind of lost a little bit in terms of I didn't have that same drive and ambition I'd always have. I didn't have that same just fire inside of me. And I was just like, I don't know what I need, but I need to like figure my life out essentially. And I wandered into a conference where they had a guest speaker, and the guest speaker was Tony Robbins. And he spent about 3 hours just talking about some basic principles he teaches that are around motivation and life and sort of finding that type of power within yourself. And immediately I was like, this is what I need. I walked out of there just 10 levels higher emotionally and going like, this is what I've been missing. And he hit on some things that really were important to me about, this balance between you can have really ambitious goals, but be happy today along the way. And I was like, I want to know more about that. It's because to me, it felt like if I set these crazy ambitious goals, I had to be unhappy to try to go get them. And if I set really complacent goals, I would feel happier, but I would feel unfulfilled in terms of trying to pursue these, something ambitious. And so it seemed like this catch 22. They say that like if the 5 people closest to you are all less successful than you, then you feel like you're amazing. If you hang out with people that are all more successful, you feel worthless. Doesn't matter what your objective level is. And so I was like, well, which of those 2 problems do I want to have? Right. I must have one of them. Turns out that's bullshit. I mean, like there's truth to the comparison factor, but you don't have to just choose one or the other. And there can be this symbiosis of motivation and aspiration, but happiness today along the way. And so I was like, I got to go. This Tony Robbins guy, I've heard of him before, but I don't know. I'm going to go to whatever his biggest conference is. So it turns out he has this conference called Date with Destiny. And I said, I'm going to that. 7 days, 15 to 17 hours a day, just crazy intensive. And the number one takeaway from that conference, up to that point in my life, what I believed was there's nothing I can do about my emotions, but I do get to choose. I don't get to choose my emotions, but I get to choose how I respond to them. I left that conference with the deep conviction and understanding that no, I can control my emotions. And that's a wild paradigm shift. And it's hard to give to people quickly, but I will try to highlight a few of the tools and some of the principles that made that transformation, because that has fundamentally changed every aspect of my life. Every aspect of my life is vastly happier, vastly more fulfilled since then. And I'm constantly working on this now. And it has gotten rid of, I used to go to therapy regularly. And I'm not saying don't go to therapy. I got great value out of it. Go to therapy if it works for you. And it did work for me for a while. Most of what I got out of that, I do not need anymore. And so to me, that's a big step forward. Most of what I got out of some of the books I was reading, some of the other things that were taking time, I don't need anymore. So I'm always looking for, because I look at leverage, how do I put less inputs in and get bigger results? And that includes in my mental health. So if I were to boil it down to what are the things that now, having had the experiences I have, if I was trying to get to optimal mental health outcomes in a proactive way on the smallest amount of time and budget, it would look like this. First and foremost, I would start by listening to Tony's audiobook for $10 called Unleash the Power Within, which will help you understand some of the core principles. And then I would go for about $250. He has an app, and I would pay that for an audio course called Time of Your Life. I'm going to explain why. So Time of Your Life, what he teaches is this thing called RPM planning. And he teaches all these different tools and all these different techniques, but what has transformed in my life using RPM planning is it's just a structured way of planning your life that helps you to do something that I think no one seems to teach us. And that is, I need to take my whole life, all the aspects, my career, my personal life, my spiritual life, my community life, everything. And I need to break it down into manageable categories. And then I need to have clear goals and visions for these areas of my life. And then now I know what success looks like. One of the most common patterns that I've seen in my employees and people I coach now since I've started doing this is so many of us are unhappy because of a vague wish, and we've not taken any time to define what we want. I'll give you an example. I, at one point, felt like, oh, I'm a bad father. Why? Well, because I just don't think I spend enough time with my kids. How much is enough time? I don't know. What are you doing to spend more time with kids? I don't know. I've made no plans whatsoever. I've just created this vague idea of what a good father is, and I've decided it's not me. And so to cope with the gap between where I am today and this perceived or this self-believed standard I'm not hitting, I just have bridged that cognitive dissonance with this new belief that layers into my subconscious and filters all my emotions and says, yeah, you're just not a good father. So that's just one example, but there's tons of ways we do this. And so the most common pattern, one of the most common patterns I've seen with people that I'm coaching is, well, I don't feel like I'm doing well in my career. I don't feel like I'm doing well at home. Great. What are the areas where you're falling short? What is your plan for your home life? Oh, well, I don't have a plan. I just am supposed to be doing these things. I'm supposed to be helping my wife. Cool. What does that mean? What does it mean to help your wife? Does that mean, what does she do that she needs help with? Does she wash the dishes and that you need to do more dishwashing? Okay, how many times a week are you going to do that? When is it? Where is it on your calendar? Like, it sounds so basic, but what's so hilarious is we would rather just sit there and go, see, I failed, than just define an actual set of goals and a vision for what success looks like. And so in every category of your life, you have to actually know what are the categories. And this is what Time of Your Life helps you do. Helps you break down your life into what are the categories of my life. So for me, I can tell you what they are. I mean, and there's all sorts of techniques in this, where it's not just defining categories, but Tony helps you, juice them up and make them really exciting sounding. So, for example, I don't have a physical health category. I have sexy athlete category. That is what I'm trying to be. So that's the category for all my physical health. And then I have a plan for this month. You can do it weekly, you can do it monthly, but I have a plan for this month that I'm going to lose 10 pounds of fat. I'm going to gain 5 pounds of muscle. My waist size that I'm measuring every month is going to go down. My chest size, arm size, and shoulder is going to go up. My supplementation plan that I designed is going to get rolled out. I know exactly the outcomes that if I do them, I get to tell myself complete success this month on physical health, or in my case, sexy athlete. If I don't, and guess what? Once I actually look at that and I say, how long, what do I need to do to make that real? And I make the plan, and we can, we're not going to get into all the steps, but you make a plan, actually you'll execute it, and you put it on your calendar. I'm spending all in maybe 20 hours a month on this. And that's a lot because physical health is one of my top priorities. Like if you take out the fact that every morning I do an hour and a half of cold plunge, sauna, and exercise, if you take that out, I'm spending maybe 3 hours a month on this. It's just, there's a bunch of time spent on like exercise. So, but I've decided to prioritize that. So I can get the majority of my outcomes in a very small amount of time. And then when I look at like relationships, instead of boring relationships, for me, it's deep relationships of passion. So it's like, that gets me really excited. I'm excited to do that. And then, the process he takes you through, you go through, what are the exact outcomes? Why do those matter to you? You find purpose in it, reasons that are really motivating. And so again, this is something that if you want to do it, I would just recommend the best thing I've found is that 250 audio course. It takes you through everything, and then you're able to apply this, right? So that's a skill. So I'm not going to keep going on this, but it's just to say, having an actual functional way, learning a skill set around designing your life, and then going and getting the outcomes you want out of your life has changed my life potentially more than anything else, because you now know what enough is, right? Early on with essentialism, I realized I need to know what enough is, but I never defined it. I never said enough to feel like I'm a good enough father. This is what it looks like. To feel like I'm a good enough leader at my business. This is what it looks like. To feel like I'm good enough at my hobbies. This is what it looks like. And so then I don't have anything to plan. I don't have any way to organize it. I just feel overwhelmed, and it feels like this massive to-do list is crushing me. Instead of, I see the outcomes I want, I go get them, and now I feel totally different about those areas of my life. And if I ever, so just recently, last Friday, I was coming back from a conference. I felt a little bit in a funk because I'd spent all week just at a conference networking, and it was boring. Like there were things about it that just kind of made me feel not as productive as my normal week. And I went and I looked at my plans for the whole month, and I went, oh, I'm already ahead of all my targets for the month. Like I'm already most of the way done with everything for the month. I'm a success. Doesn't matter that I was feeling that way. My whole perspective changed because I had a place to look to see, oh, this is what I'm doing. It's working, and I'm achieving what I want to achieve in all these areas. So that is, to me, one of the biggest tools that has changed my life. Then you go from there. There are some psychology tools that in a field of study called NLP that have fundamentally changed my life. There is the 6 human needs, which also Tony teaches, which has helped me to understand my life. And there is what he teaches, which is called the triad, which is understanding what you focus on, what your beliefs and language are, and what your physiology is, how those affect your emotions. And so, again, those are little plants of things that you can go research on your own. I could teach them all, but we'd be here for 4 hours. But the point is, those are the tools that have made the biggest difference in my life, because so much of what I made complicated before was made simple when I just simply had a way of understanding what was actually producing the emotions, things such as values conflicts. I went through the process of realizing, oh, if my number one value is success, which it was at the time, then yeah, of course I'm going to sacrifice and feel like my love and relationships aren't as fulfilled, because when they conflict, I'm choosing success and I have the money to show for it. But if that's not what I want, I have to consciously change the order of my values, and I have to change my rules about how I live those values. And once those are in alignment and they're harmonious, now my life feels great, and nothing fundamentally changed about my life. All that changed was my programming, my software, my subconscious narrative about all of it. And once that changed, I started having different emotional experiences in the same circumstances. And that's just a mind-bending thing to have happen, to go from 5 days ago, I felt this way under a set of circumstances, and now I feel totally the opposite under the same circumstances, is one of the most empowering feelings I've ever had in my life. And it's made me so passionate about teaching this stuff to my employees and everyone else, and helping them see that, like, the jump you can make in your mental health when you implement some of these tools. And so anyways, those would be some of the top tools. If you want to elaborate on any of them, we can. If we're running out of time, that's fine too. But those for me were the master skills that encompass some of those learnings I had from essentialism, from lost connections, other things. But God, I'm so tactical to a point of like, look, here's exactly how you plan. Here's how you get the results you want in every area of your life. Here's how you change your physiology, your focus, and your language such that you'll experience things differently. Here's tools like the mood meter, where you can actually plan a different experience and have a different experience. You can convince your brain that something's going to feel a different way, and then actually have it feel a different way. There's so many cool tools in there. And way more that I haven't even shared that you will find that can just make such a big impact. So that would be the thing that's shifted the biggest for me.
I'm going to go buy that Tony Robbins course.
You should.
No,
It's huge.
so you're right. We are running out of time here, but I think there's a really important question here that I want to cover, especially about defining your goals. Does defining your goals, like what's the healthy boundary between kind of that? I know like the 10x mentality is you have to think way beyond what you're capable of to achieve what you can't. And then setting those too low goals that you get the goal within 2 or 3 days, then you've got the rest of your month just to think you're a terrible person. What's the healthy definition of a goal? How do you healthily define that?
Okay, so in RPM, there's this concept called chunking. And so there's a few different things that happen in RPM. The very first thing you're going to do is you're going to set a vision for that area of your life. So you're going to write down, if this area, let's say the area is my physical body, if that area was absolutely perfect, idyllic, I was already exactly where I want to be. He's going to have you do a meditation and really envision that and see it and see yourself. What does it mean? For me, in fact, I'm willing to share. I'll tell you a couple of things that are written here under mine. So, I see myself running and playing sports with my kids, partying with my shirt off at the lake, enjoying the sun at the beach, skiing down the slopes, even late into my 80s, 90s. I never feel physically limited. Pain is minimized through amazing fitness and nutrition, right? And so I can go on. There's a big paragraph here of this is what it means to me to be a sexy athlete. It's like I get to feel this way. And so once you have that vision for your future, then what you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, well, what are some goals that I would have? And he goes through a goal setting exercise, but really he likes to talk about them as outcomes as opposed to goals. We could talk about why, but the main difference is just outcomes happen and goals often don't. But an outcome that would happen along the way to getting to that. And so then once you have a list of outcomes, you're going to take that and you're going to say, okay, that's probably a 10-year outcome. This is probably a 1-year outcome. Now, when I look at the 1-year outcomes, let me now chunk those down and say, what would it take if I wanted to get that 1-year outcome? What would it take in 90 days? What do I need to do in the next 90 days? Okay, well, now I have a vision for what that takes in 90 days. Great. Now to get that in 90 days, what would I have to do this month or this week? And so you get down to a chunk that is 3 steps or less. So our brain's thinking 1, 2, 3, and many. And so when something is so ill-defined, like a goal is so big that we don't know all the steps to get there, then we will never get there, or it will be smothering and overwhelming. In fact, it'll start to really ruminate in our mind because it's like, you still haven't figured this out. You still haven't figured this out. And so it'll do that until we just give up on it because we don't want that pain of it just coming back up, right? And so the chunking process is to get it down to something that's like, okay, if I want to be 80 and skiing down the slopes, first of all, I'm not going to be 80 for a long time. Second of all, I got to be a better skier and I got to be in certain physical condition. I've got a knee issue I got to deal with, and I've got to get my weight down. So I've lost more than 50 pounds in the last 6 months. And I did that because I knew that this was my vision. So it started with this. And then I said, okay, in order for this to be true, what would have to be true? Well, I'd have to get my hormone levels right. I'd have to go see a physician and really look at all of my blood metrics and measure, where am I and what are my risk factors? And then I've got to prioritize my diet above a bunch of other things. And so these are all things that need to happen. I didn't do it all at once. I just started doing, all right, this is what I'm gonna get done this week. This is what I'm gonna get done that week. This is something I'm gonna do once a month. This is something I'm gonna do once a quarter. And so if I were to really simplify this process of chunking, what you're really doing is you're taking a long-term outcome you want, and instead of trying to just say, oh, I got to do that, and it's overwhelming, you're turning that into, what type of person would I have to become such that that outcome would be inevitable? And so that's my favorite question to ask is, what person would I have to become such that that outcome would be inevitable? And that then takes me down to the present where I say, okay, the person who's 80 and skiing and loving it, the person I'd have to become is I'd have to be at a really healthy weight. I'd have to have lean muscle mass. I'd have to have a diet that looks like this. Okay, so if those are the building blocks, now what can I do today and this week and plan into my calendar that is part of accomplishing this vision of these are the steps I can take to become that person? Because our identity, as Atomic Habits defines, is really just that which we do consistently. So once I get it down to these are the things I need to do consistently to become that kind of person, now it's just go execute. Now it's like, all right, there's a list of things scheduled for these times and you go do it. The other element to answering your question is just, he has you go through a process where once you have all these tasks that you could do, you don't schedule all of them. You look at all your outcomes, you say, all right, you use the Pareto principle and you say, all right, of these outcomes, what 20% are driving 80% of the results? I'm going to focus on just those ones. And now for those results of all the, I drew this big, massive action plan of all the things that could get me there. If I could only do 20% of those, which ones would I do? All right. And now among those, what are the 3 things that if I do them this week, I'll feel like a success? And so this is a big part of why he has you focus on outcomes instead of tasks, because there's always more tasks, but a hyper focus on the outcome for the week, for the month that lead to the long-term outcome on the year, 5-year, 10-year level, that allows you to be so much more creative, so that now something I used to be like, oh, I learned that, this is important. Hydrotherapy is important. And so I have to do that, 5 times a week now. It's like, no, you don't. Or when I first started doing cold plunges, it was like, I was trying to go as long as I could. And I do several sessions. I was doing 12, 15 minutes a day, and then oscillating with the sauna. And then I was like, look, the research says after 2 to 3 minutes, I've gotten all the benefits. My norepinephrine's doubled. So I'm just going to go do that for 2 to 3 minutes. I'm going to do the sauna for 20 minutes because that's what the research says is enough. And then I'm getting to the gym. So now something that used to take me an hour takes me 23 minutes because I'm more focused on the outcome I want, not layering in more and more stuff to do. And so in the time it used to take me just to cold plunge and sauna, I do cold plunge, sauna, gym, and get home. And so because I got more outcome focused. And so I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to layer in a whole other hour for the gym. No, I'm not. So the more outcome focused I am, we can start to be systematic about getting down to the minimum number of inputs that get us there. And then we start to realize, oh, turns out a lot of the outcomes I wanted are like 3 to 5 hours a month of time. And if I do that, I get there in a year, or I get there in 6 months.
And
Like
it's
for
easy.
me,
It's easy too.
it's totally easy. I mean, I know a lot of people struggle with weight, but I have struggled to lose weight for 7, 8 years. I'm down 50 pounds in 6 months, and
Congratulations.
it's not been hard. So what changed was my beliefs and my narrative. What changed was my focus, and what changed was my planning process to say, I'm going to do the core things that drive the vast majority of the results, which means I'm going to track my food every day. I'm going to get up and make a huge protein heavy breakfast that gets me half or more to my protein goal. And I'm going to have protein shakes ready for the middle of the day to get the rest of my protein goal, such that dinner is like an optional meal and I'm done and I'm good. So now I don't even end up in the fast food lane or, looking for a lunch or interrupting my day. I don't have to. I nailed it at the beginning of the day. And so I'm almost guaranteed to succeed on my diet every day now because I spend 30 minutes in the morning making breakfast. I never used to eat breakfast. I don't like breakfast, but this is the easiest path to doing it. So if I can just get 30 minutes a day focused on my food, and also I had a narrative that I don't cook food. Now I have a narrative that I love to cook healthy food and eat it. And so now that narrative is like, oh, I'm excited that I get to cook food this morning. And I'm no chef like my wife, but I can cook up what I need and I can have a really healthy breakfast. And I had this incredible breakfast this morning, and that's all it takes. So it's like, you can get it down to a few things where for me, if I just hit my protein goal and I just track my food so that nothing sneaks in and I'm not over my caloric goal. My third one is water, but I don't even always track that perfectly. But if I just get my water for the day, those 3 things, I'm losing weight. It's inevitable. And so like boiling an outcome down to the few ingredients that actually create most of the outcome. And that's different for everyone. But once you know, it's like, well, now I'm going to make those my musts. Those are non-negotiable because that's going to get me 80% of the way there. And so instead of having a list that's like work out, get a massage, then, eat a healthy breakfast and a healthy snack, and then a healthy lunch, and then a healthy dinner. And then I'm going to do that. I'm like, look, I don't have time for all that. Has anyone done it in a way that doesn't do that? Okay. What did they do? All right, let me try that. That worked for me. Boom. That's my thing. And so, and then I, for me, just full disclosure, I started out on semaglutide and then switched to tirzepatide, and those were super helpful. Really, just tirzepatide was helpful for me. And then I got off it, but I didn't even know it was available. I was like, what do people who break through do? What are some of the options out there? So like, you have to go find a way, because people with less resources and less advantages than you have probably done whatever it is you want to do. And so instead of looking at all the examples of people that haven't or why you haven't or why you can't, if you hyper focus in on the outcome and then you find people who've done it from your circumstances, now I have something to model. And now I can go model after that and immediately find a result, or very quickly find a result. And then what that does is it creates this deep conviction in you that you're like, I can do this. And if I can do this, what else can I do? And by the way, I can keep doing this. I used to have this narrative of like, I can only focus on one area of my life at a time. I'm either losing weight or I'm being a good dad or I'm thriving at work. I can't do all that at the same time. Totally, totally wrong. I can do all of that. So anyways, I could go on forever about this, so I'll wrap it up, but it's just to say that that process is what gives you that balance between overwhelming goal to, minutia or lots of stuff. There's chunking and there's prioritization, and then you get down to just the core things that matter, and you just religiously make those things happen.
Dude, I love how passionate you are. It's awesome. Thank you so much. Dude, looking back at everything you've gone through, obviously there's so much resilience here, but looking back, what can you appreciate about your journey?
I mean, everything. So here's the thing. It's like, I generally don't, I look back on everything through the lens of, wow, that was perfect. Like that worked out. Not because there weren't things I could have done differently, but just one of the concepts in NLP is this idea of these presuppositions. Like what is the presupposed truth behind whatever you're thinking or doing? And really simply put, NLP sort of has these tenets or these ideas of like, just instead of arguing or debating whether or not this is true, just be willing to try it on and see if it gets you a result. And so in my life, I have found that to be really useful, where it's like, instead of obsessing over whether or not something was right or wrong, it is you can just be in your head and argue that all day long. You can argue a empowering narrative or a disempowering narrative all day long about anything that's happened in your life. So my question is not so much, looking back, what is my narrative? It is more from the presupposition of everything clearly has worked out amazing in my life and to my good. Let me look back on why. And so if I'm presupposing that everything was for my good and was building me into the person I am today, then all I see when I look back is the reasons that worked out and how it was helpful and why it was a blessing and this great thing. It doesn't mean I couldn't look back and make a negative narrative or a narrative about regret. But how would that empower me, or how would that help me progress? I don't see a way that it would. And so then my choice is, when I can see that choice, my choice is to use the presupposition that's going to get me the most useful outcome. And so the most useful outcome is to find all the ways it worked in my favor, all the ways that I grew from it, because that's going to empower me and drive me to then learn from what's happening right now and look at how everything now is happening in my favor. And to borrow from the Stoics and Ryan Holiday, all of my current obstacles become opportunities. They become the way. And now I see that in real time instead of having to later be like, oh, why did I grow from that? Instead, it's like, oh, good. Jocko Willink, one of my favorite stories, he talked about how anytime someone brought a problem, he just said good. And it was to pattern interrupt them and get them to go, wait, why is that good? And change their focus from this is a problem to this could be an opportunity. So just as a leader, that was something he did to interrupt his people. And so that's kind of my mindset as well, is when I look back on everything, it's good. And it's not because everything was perfect, but it's because look how it's turned out. So now what can I build on from that to continue to just enjoy my life more and more? And, Tony has this concept of a primary question. It's this, what is the most common question we come back to? And we all sort of passively have one. And that can really direct our focus into negative areas of our life. So if my constant question is, why am I not good enough? Or for me, why does nobody like me as a kid? That constantly directed my focus in a way that made me feel angry, hurt, all those things, made me needy. Now my question, because we can choose a question, we can design it, and then we can program that into our brain and really adopt that. And so now my question is, how can I enjoy even more of the abundance and the love that I create? Because it's all happening. It's all happening right now in a way that I can enjoy it. And so I presuppose in that statement that it's already happening. I presuppose that there's love and abundance in my life, and I presuppose that I'm already enjoying it. And so by having those presuppositions in there, now I'm just asking, how do I even more enjoy it? How do I take it to the next level? How do I get even happier? And so that's one more little tool for the audience to think about. What is my primary question that I keep asking myself, and what's that doing to my focus? And what could it be? What could my question be that I'm asking myself that really elevates my life such that all of a sudden it feels like everything's going exactly right, even when things are hard? Doesn't mean there's no negative emotions, but it's like when negativity happens, I'm like, okay, but why is this? How could I enjoy even more the love and abundance I create?
What gift does this offer me? Is the question
Absolutely.
I ask.
That's a
Dude,
good one.
yeah, dude, thank you. And my last question for you, bro. For those just getting into the realm of mental health, I know this has been like an information overload almost of so much stuff that people could use. Like what advice do you have for those people just getting into the realm of mental health?
Well, I'm no therapist, so I don't know, but I would say disproportionately, all right, this comes back to leverage, which is maybe a great way to close this out, which is if you're doing things the right way, it doesn't necessarily take more effort. And so I think you need to be willing to question some of your own narratives early on about like, well, it has to be hard, or it has to take time, it has to be, I have to have this. I like the frame that a lot of us use of like everything happens for a reason, or this is going to be for my good, but it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take a long time. It might, but it doesn't have to. And so if you can question that early of I'm struggling with my mental health, and you can say, you know, what what would it look like if this was actually easy? What would it look like if I could make a huge change in this area of my life quickly? And then you might find different resources. So I would just say, wherever you're at in your journey, I guess really the message here is try to ask better questions, because bad questions will take you on a long journey down mental health, because there's a lot of bad answers, and there's a lot of people that want to feel justified in their pain, and so they just want to tell you that it's going to keep happening, or that you should feel that way. And I see this all the time, mostly from like well-intentioned friends that are like, yeah, it's just that's how it is, life sucks, it's painful. And it's like, that stuff's just going to really slow down your progress. So ask better questions. Where could I find someone who is in my circumstances who totally changed their mindset and is free of this? Where could I find, what book could I read that could give me a skill that totally changes this for me, or whatever, and just try to keep asking better and better questions that allow you to find the answer you need at the right time.
Love that, bro. Dude, thank you, Spencer. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of the amazing information that you had, dude. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I can tell you are so passionate about helping people, which is amazing, dude. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Where
My
can
pleasure.
people, yeah, dude. So I know you have your podcast. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit more about your podcast, where we can find it. If people want to like hire you as a consultant, where can they find you?
Awesome. So if you want to follow along on the podcast, that is lessonsinleverage.com. And that has links to all of our different social media. We have our biggest following on TikTok. And then, you can subscribe to the podcast on whatever podcast platform you use. Um, if you need help with technology consulting or generative AI, you can reach out to Solved.Cloud. That's SOLVD.cloud. And so, the best way to reach us is on our website there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the most common social media that I'm involved with. Most of my other social media is managed by our team. So if you want to talk to me, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. And that's just Spencer Lowe on LinkedIn. And yeah, those are probably the best ways to get involved.
Cool. Dude, thank you so much. I'll make sure to put all that stuff in the description as well, so they can just go right to the link and click on it. Everyone, thank you for tuning in and listening to Spencer. He is a freaking master at this stuff, guys. So please understand that what he's saying is so incredibly true. And I know that you thought of someone, at least someone that could benefit from the lessons that Spencer taught today. I invite you to share it with those people so they can get all the benefits that Spencer taught today. Guys, if you want to come on my show and be one of my guests, just understand that no story is too big and no name is too small. If you do have a story, I want to share it all. Just contact me at chase@thewellnesscenter.life, or you can go to our website, www.thewellnesscenter.life, where we rejuvenate one session or every cell in your body through red light, one session at a time. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace out.